The forest was eerily silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves as a soft breeze swept through. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was heavy, oppressive, like the calm before an inevitable storm. She stood there, her back pressed against the rough bark of an ancient tree, holding her breath. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it might give her away. Her name was Lyra, and she knew this moment would define her fate. Behind her were miles of dense woodland, but ahead lay only uncertainty and danger. Humans had been hunting her kind for years now, relentless in their pursuit. They saw her people not as sentient beings but as monsters to be exterminated. And after weeks on the run, evading traps and ambushes, Lyra had finally been cornered. She could hear them now, the crunch of boots on dry twigs, the murmured voices exchanging directions. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. Their weapons glinted menacingly under the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy above. Her sharp eyes caught glimpses of their movements between the trees. They moved with precision, closing in like predators circling their prey. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the jagged stone knife tucked into her belt. It was primitive compared to the sleek firearms the humans carried, but it was all she had. Her people weren't warriors by nature. They valued knowledge over violence, harmony over conquest. But survival demanded sacrifices, and tonight, Lyra was prepared to fight if it meant staying alive. As the footsteps grew louder, she braced herself. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to flee, to find another way out, but she knew better. Running would only lead to exhaustion, leaving her vulnerable. No, this time, she would face them head-on. If death awaited her, then so be it, but she wouldn't go down without a fight. A shadow emerged from behind a nearby bush, followed by another. 2 figures stepped into view, their faces obscured by helmets equipped with glowing visors. One of them raised a weapon, aiming directly at her. Lyra tensed, ready to lunge forward or dodge sideways, whichever instinct dictated. But then something unexpected happened. A 3rd figure appeared, taller than the others, his stance relaxed yet commanding. He held up a hand, signaling the others to lower their guns. Confusion rippled through Lyra's mind. Why wasn't he attacking? What game was this human playing? Wait, he said, his voice calm but firm. Let me talk to her. Talk? Lyra blinked, unsure whether she'd heard correctly. In all her encounters with humans, none had ever shown interest in speaking. Violence had always been their first language. Yet here he was, standing unarmed, his gaze steady and unwavering. For a brief moment, fear gave way to curiosity. Who was this man, and what did he want? More importantly, why did his presence make her feel uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain? Before she could process further, the man took a step closer. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though trying not to startle her. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, his tone softer now. My name is Arlen. I just want to understand. Understand. The word echoed in Lyra's mind, foreign yet strangely comforting. For years, her people had lived in hiding, misunderstood and hunted. Could this human truly offer something different? Or was this merely a ploy to gain her trust before striking? Her grip tightened on the stone knife. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her life depended on staying vigilant. Still, something about Arlen's demeanor made her hesitate. Perhaps it was the sincerity in his voice, or perhaps it was the flicker of hope that stubbornly refused to die within her. Whatever it was, Lyra decided to wait. To listen? Because deep down, buried beneath layers of fear and mistrust, she wanted to believe that understanding was still possible, even between 2 vastly different species. And so, with bated breath, she watched as Arlen took another cautious step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Little did she know, this encounter would change everything, for both of them. The air between them crackled with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. Lyra's sharp eyes darted between Arlen and the 2 other humans standing a few paces behind him. Their weapons were lowered but not holstered, their fingers still hovering near the triggers. She could see the uncertainty in their stances, the way they shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure whether to trust Arlen's approach. Arlen, however, remained steady. His hands stayed raised, palms open and visible. He didn't move too quickly or make any sudden gestures that might spook her. Instead, he spoke again, his voice calm and measured. "I know you're scared," he said. "And I don't blame you. But I'm not your enemy." Lyra's jaw tightened. Enemy or not, she had learned long ago that words could be as dangerous as weapons when wielded by humans. Still, something about Arlen felt different. There was no arrogance in his tone, no sense of superiority. Just a quiet determination that made her pause. "What do you want?" she asked finally, her voice low and cautious. It was the first time she'd spoken since being cornered, and even then, she kept her distance, her body coiled like a spring, ready to strike, or flee, at a moment's notice. Arlen tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Answers," he replied simply. "For years we've been told stories about your kind, stories that paint you as monsters. But I've seen enough of this world to know that things aren't always what they seem." His words caught her off guard. Stories? Were there myths about her people among the humans? If so, it was little wonder they feared her kind. Misunderstandings often bred hatred, and hatred led to violence. Yet here was Arlen, questioning those very narratives. "I'm not a monster," Lyra said sharply, her voice tinged with anger now. "We never attacked your people. We never harmed anyone. And yet you hunt us like animals." Her outburst seemed to take Arlen aback, but only for a moment. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her pain. "I believe you," he said. "But convincing others won't be easy. That's why I need your help." "My help?" Lyra scoffed, gripping her stone knife tighter. "Why should I trust you? You're one of them." Arlen sighed, lowering his hands slightly. "Because I'm also one of you," he said quietly. The statement hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. For a brief moment, Lyra thought she'd misheard him. But the look in his eyes told her otherwise. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, narrowing her gaze. "You're human. I can see it." "Not entirely," Arlen admitted. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the two soldiers behind him. They exchanged uneasy looks, clearly uncomfortable with whatever Arlen was about to reveal. Taking a deep breath, he turned back to Lyra. "My mother was one of your kind." The revelation hit Lyra like a thunderclap. She stared at him, stunned into silence. Could it be true? Was this man, a human soldier, part of her own lineage? It seemed impossible, yet something about his demeanor rang true. The way he carried himself, the subtle nuances in his movements, they weren't entirely human. "How is that possible?" she asked after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a long story," Arlen replied. "One I'll share, if you let me. But first I need you to understand why I'm here. My mother taught me about your people, about your culture and your values. She showed me that we don't have to live in fear of each other. But her teachings put her in danger, and eventually she disappeared. I've spent years searching for answers, trying to find where she came from, and who she truly was." Lyra listened intently, her initial skepticism giving way to curiosity. If what Arlen said was true, then he wasn't just another hunter. He was someone caught between worlds, much like herself. Perhaps that was why she hadn't sensed hostility from him earlier. He understood her plight because he shared it. "And you think I can help you find her?" she asked cautiously. Arlen shook his head. "It's more complicated than that. Finding her is only part of it. What I really want is to bridge the gap between our peoples, to prove that coexistence is possible. But to do that I need proof. Evidence that your kind isn't what they say you are." Lyra frowned, considering his words. Proof. Evidence. These were concepts she understood all too well. In her years of running, she'd seen firsthand how easily lies could spread, how quickly fear could turn into hatred. If Arlen truly believed in peace, then maybe, just maybe, he was worth trusting. But trust wasn't given lightly, especially not to a human. Even if he claimed to be part of her kind, his actions would ultimately determine his intentions. And so, Lyra decided to test him. If I agree to help you, she began, her tone firm. What happens next? Will your friends stop hunting my people? Will they leave us alone? Arlen glanced back at the soldiers once more, his expression grim. They follow orders, he said. But I can promise you this, as long as you're with me, no harm will come to you. Beyond that, he trailed off, unable to make guarantees he couldn't keep. It wasn't the answer Lyra had hoped for, but it was honest. Honesty, she realized, was a rare commodity in this world. Maybe that was reason enough to take a chance on him. Fine, she said at last, lowering her knife slightly. But if you betray me, I swear I'll make sure you regret it. Arlen nodded solemnly. Fair enough. With that fragile truce established, the group began to move. Arlen gestured for the soldiers to stay back as he walked alongside Lyra, careful to maintain a respectful distance. She watched him warily, her instincts screaming at her to remain vigilant. Trusting a human, even one claiming to share her blood, was a risk she couldn't afford to take lightly. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Lyra found herself wondering what lay ahead. Would Arlen's quest for truth bring about the change he sought? Or would it only lead to more suffering for both their kinds? Only time would tell. The forest grew darker as they moved deeper into its heart, the canopy overhead thickening until only slivers of moonlight filtered through. Lyra walked ahead, her steps light and deliberate, while Arlen followed closely behind. The two soldiers trailed farther back, their presence a constant reminder of the delicate balance between trust and suspicion. Lyra glanced over her shoulder occasionally, studying Arlen's face in the dim light. There was something haunting about his features, something that reminded her of stories her elders used to tell. Tales of those who had crossed the boundary between species, blending human and non-human traits into a fragile existence. Was Arlen one such being? Or was he merely a human with good intentions? You said your mother taught you about my people, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. What did she tell you? Arlen hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground as if searching for the right words. She told me we're more alike than different, he replied softly. That fear blinds us to what truly matters, understanding. She believed coexistence was possible, even though most humans refused to listen. Lyra nodded slowly, absorbing his answer. His words resonated with her own beliefs, yet they also raised questions. If his mother had been so wise, why had she disappeared? And how had Arlen ended up among humans, serving as one of their soldiers? What happened to her? Lyra asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Pain flickered across Arlen's face, and for a moment he looked younger, more vulnerable. She vanished when I was a child, he admitted. One day, she was there, teaching me about the stars and the forests, and the next, she was gone. No explanation, no trace. All I found was this. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, intricately carved pendant. It shimmered faintly under the sparse moonlight, its design unmistakably alien. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the symbol etched onto the pendant. It was an ancient mark of her people, one reserved for leaders or visionaries. Whoever had crafted it possessed great skill and knowledge. But what struck her most was the realization that Arlen's mother must have held significant importance within her community. That's not something just anyone would have, Lyra murmured, her voice tinged with awe. Who was she? I don't know, Arlen confessed. All I remember is that she spoke of a place, a hidden sanctuary where our kind could live without fear. She called it Erinder. Have you heard of it? Lyra froze mid-step, her mind racing. Erinder. The name stirred memories buried deep within her consciousness. It was whispered in hushed tones during gatherings, spoken only by the oldest members of her tribe. A mythical refuge said to exist beyond the reach of humans, protected by ancient magic and guarded fiercely by its inhabitants. Many dismissed it as legend, but others swore it was real. Yes, Lyra said finally, turning to face him. I've heard of it. But few believe it exists anymore. Arlen's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and desperation. Do you think it's still out there? Do you think she might be there? Lyra hesitated, torn between revealing too much and withholding information that could prove vital. Trusting Arlen was risky enough. Leading him to Arinder, if it even existed, was another matter entirely. Yet something about his earnestness compelled her to consider the possibility. If it does exist, she began cautiously, it won't be easy to find. My people have spent generations searching for it, guided only by fragments of old maps and cryptic clues. Even then, many never returned. Arlen nodded grimly, unsurprised by her warning. I understand the risks, he said. But I need to try. For her, and for everyone else who's suffered because of ignorance. Lyra studied him carefully, weighing his resolve against the dangers they'd inevitably face. If Arinder truly existed, reaching it would require navigating treacherous terrain, evading hunters, and deciphering riddles left behind by ancestors long gone. And if they failed, the consequences could be catastrophic, for both their peoples. Fine, she said at last, her tone resolute. I'll help you look. But we do this my way. No shortcuts, no reckless decisions. Agreed? Arlen extended a hand, his expression earnest. Agreed. Their pack sealed, the group pressed onward, following a narrow path that wound through dense underbrush. As they traveled, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig, sent her instincts into overdrive. She scanned the shadows, her sharp eyes catching fleeting glimpses of movement, but nothing concrete. Finally, after hours of walking, they reached a clearing bathed in silver moonlight. At its center stood a towering stone monolith, weathered by time and covered in moss. Etched into its surface were symbols similar to those on Arlen's pendant, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with an inner light. This is it, Arlen breathed, stepping forward. It's part of the map. Lyra joined him, her brow furrowed as she examined the markings. They matched descriptions passed down through oral tradition, fragments of a larger puzzle meant to guide seekers toward Arinder. But these symbols alone weren't enough. They needed context, a key to unlock their meaning. There's more to it, Lyra said, tracing the carvings with her fingers. These are coordinates, but they're incomplete. We'll need additional pieces to piece together the full picture. Arlen frowned, disappointment flashing across his face. Where do we find them? Before Lyra could respond, a low growl echoed from the trees surrounding the clearing. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she spun around, her knife drawn and ready. The soldiers raised their weapons, scanning the darkness for signs of danger. Then, without warning, shapes emerged from the shadows, large, sleek creatures with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. They moved silently, circling the group with predatory grace. Lyra's heart sank as she realized what they were: shadow beasts, legendary predators known to guard sacred sites. We need to move, she hissed, backing toward Arlen. Now. But the beasts were faster. With a deafening roar, they lunged forward, closing the distance in an instant. Chaos erupted as the soldiers fired their weapons, bright flashes illuminating the clearing. Lyra darted between the attackers, her movements swift and precise, striking with her knife whenever an opening presented itself. Amid the chaos, Arlen remained surprisingly calm. Instead of reaching for a weapon, he pulled out his pendant and held it aloft, chanting words in a language Lyra didn't recognize. To her astonishment, the beasts paused, their glowing eyes fixed on the pendant. For a brief moment, the clearing fell silent. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the shadow beasts melted back into the forest, vanishing like smoke. Breathing heavily, Lyra turned to Arlen, her expression a mix of shock and suspicion. What did you just do? Arlen lowered the pendant, his hands trembling slightly. My mother taught me that, he said, his voice barely audible. It's a song of peace, an offering to the guardians of sacred places. Lyra stared at him, realizing for the first time just how much he had inherited from his mother. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain: their journey was far from over. The clearing was eerily quiet now, the shadow beasts having retreated into the depths of the forest. Lyra stood frozen, her knife still clutched tightly in her hand, though the immediate danger had passed. Her sharp eyes darted between Arlen and the soldiers, her mind racing to process what she had just witnessed. Arlen's pendant hung limply from his fingers, its faint glow dimming as he lowered it. He looked drained, his shoulders slumped slightly as if the effort of calming the beasts had taken a toll on him. Yet there was no trace of arrogance or triumph in his demeanor, only quiet resolve. "That shouldn't have worked," Lyra said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might summon the creatures back. "Shadow beasts don't retreat unless they're killed, or unless you're one of us." Arlen met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I told you," he said simply. "My mother taught me things. Things about your people, and about myself." Lyra exhaled sharply, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She wanted to believe him, but every instinct screamed at her to remain cautious. If Arlen truly carried some connection to her kind, then why hadn't he revealed it sooner? Why had he spent years living among humans, fighting against those like her? "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she demanded, her tone sharper now. "If you're part of my people, why are you here with them?" Arlen flinched, guilt flickering across his face. "Because I didn't know who I could trust," he admitted. "For most of my life, I've been caught between two worlds, either fully accepted by humans nor embraced by your kind. When I joined the soldiers, it wasn't because I believed in their cause. It was because I needed answers. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find something that would lead me to my mother." His words struck a chord deep within Lyra. She understood what it meant to feel torn between identities, to belong nowhere and everywhere at once. And yet, she couldn't ignore the fact that his presence among humans had likely contributed to the suffering of her people. How many hunts had he participated in? How many lives had been lost under his watch? "You expect me to forgive you for everything you've done?" she asked bitterly, her grip tightening on her knife. "Just because you claim to be searching for answers?" "No," Arlen replied, his voice steady despite the accusation in hers. "I don't expect forgiveness. All I can offer is honesty, and a chance to make things right. If you help me find Arinder, if we can prove that coexistence is possible, then maybe we can stop the cycle of violence. Isn't that worth trying?" Lyra hesitated, torn between anger and hope. On one hand, Arlen represented everything she despised about humans: their greed, their fear, their willingness to destroy what they didn't understand. On the other hand, he also embodied something rare, a bridge between their peoples. Someone who might actually listen, someone who could change the narrative. But trust was fragile, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down, not yet. "Fine," she said after a long pause, her tone clipped. "We'll keep going. But if you cross me, if you betray even a hint of loyalty to them—" She gestured toward the soldiers standing a few paces away, their weapons still drawn but lowered cautiously. "Then I won't hesitate to end you." Arlen nodded solemnly, accepting her terms without protest. "Fair enough." As they resumed their journey, the group moved deeper into the forest, following clues etched into the monolith's symbols. According to the markings, the next piece of the map lay hidden in a place called the Veiled Glade, a secluded area shrouded in mist, and rumored to be protected by ancient magic. Few dared to venture there, and fewer still returned to tell the tale. The path grew increasingly treacherous, the terrain littered with jagged rocks and tangled roots. Lyra led the way, her movements fluid and sure-footed, while Arlen struggled to keep up. The soldiers lagged behind, their heavy boots crunching loudly against the forest floor. More than once, Lyra shot them a warning glance, silently urging them to tread more carefully. Every sound carried in these woods, and drawing attention was the last thing they needed. By the time they reached the edge of the Veiled Glade, dawn was breaking, casting a pale golden light over the landscape. A thick fog blanketed the area, swirling lazily around the base of towering trees. In the distance, Lyra could make out the faint outline of ruins, crumbling stone structures half buried in moss and vines. "This is it," she murmured, scanning the glade warily. Something about the place felt wrong. The air was unnaturally still, devoid of the usual sounds of wildlife. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the eerie tranquility. Arlen stepped forward, his pendant glowing faintly once again. Do you feel that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded grimly. Magic, she confirmed. Strong magic. Whatever we're looking for, it's close. They ventured into the glade cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the dense carpet of fallen leaves. As they approached the ruins, Lyra noticed strange carvings along the walls, symbols similar to those on the monolith, but far more intricate. Each marking pulsed faintly, as if alive, and emitted a soft hum that resonated in her chest. It's a test, she realized aloud, her eyes narrowing. These ruins aren't just hiding the map, they're guarding it. We'll need to solve whatever puzzle they've left behind. Arlen frowned, studying the carvings intently. Any idea how to start? Before Lyra could respond, a figure emerged from the mist, a woman cloaked in tattered robes, her face obscured by a hood. Her presence was both ethereal and menacing, her movements fluid yet deliberate. She raised a staff adorned with glowing runes, pointing it directly at the group. Who dares disturb the sanctity of this place? Her voice echoed, cold and commanding. Lyra stepped forward, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. We mean no harm, she said carefully. We seek the map to Erinder. Our intentions are pure. The woman tilted her head, studying them with an intensity that made Lyra's skin crawl. Finally, she lowered her staff slightly, though her stance remained wary. If you walk this path without ulterior motives, she said, prove yourselves worthy, or leave now. Without waiting for a response, she gestured toward the ruins. The ground beneath their feet began to shift, revealing a series of platforms suspended over a chasm. Symbols lit up along the edges, forming a complex pattern that seemed to pulse with energy. A trial, Lyra muttered under her breath. This isn't going to be easy. Arlen glanced at her, determination flashing in his eyes. Let's do it. With no other choice, the group stepped onto the first platform, beginning the perilous challenge laid before them. As the mist swirled around them, obscuring their surroundings, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the Guardian, but by forces far older and more powerful than they could imagine. Whatever awaited them in the veiled glade, one thing was certain: failure was not an option. The platforms beneath their feet shimmered faintly, as though alive with energy. Each step they took sent ripples across the surface, distorting the glowing symbols etched into the edges. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing down on them like an unseen weight. Lyra led the way, her movements cautious but deliberate, while Arlen followed closely behind. The soldiers lagged a few paces back, their unease evident in the way they gripped their weapons tightly. This place, it feels wrong, one of the soldiers muttered under his breath, glancing nervously at the swirling mist around them. His voice was barely audible, yet it seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off invisible walls and returning distorted, as if mocking him. Stay focused, Lyra snapped sharply, casting him a warning glare. Your fear will only make things worse. The soldier swallowed hard but said nothing further, his gaze fixed firmly ahead. Lyra didn't blame him for his apprehension, even she felt a creeping sense of dread, though she refused to let it show. Whatever this trial was, it wasn't just testing their physical abilities, it was probing their minds, forcing them to confront their deepest fears and doubts. As they reached the second platform, the ground beneath them shifted suddenly, tilting forward and nearly sending one of the soldiers tumbling into the chasm below. He caught himself just in time, his knuckles white as he clung to the edge, breathing heavily. Lyra turned to help him up, her expression grim. You can't afford to hesitate here, she warned. Every move has consequences. Trust your instincts, or don't move at all. The soldier nodded shakily, pulling himself back onto the platform. Arlen offered him a steadying hand, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the others. We'll get through this, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Together. Lyra shot him a sidelong glance, noting the quiet determination in his voice. For someone who claimed to be searching for answers, he certainly carried himself like a leader. It made her wonder again about his mother. What kind of woman had raised such a man? And how had she managed to instill in him values so different from those of his human counterparts? They continued onward, navigating the shifting platforms with increasing difficulty. At times, the path seemed to vanish entirely, leaving them suspended in midair until they solved a riddle or deciphered a pattern. Symbols would light up in sequence, requiring them to step on specific tiles in perfect harmony. One misstep could mean falling into the abyss, and none of them were eager to find out what lay at the bottom. At one point, the group encountered a particularly challenging puzzle, a series of floating stones arranged in a spiral, each inscribed with fragments of text in an ancient language. Lyra recognized some of the words. They were fragments of a song passed down through generations, meant to guide seekers toward Erinder. But the verses were incomplete, jumbled together in a way that defied logic. "This isn't random," she murmured, studying the stones carefully. "It's a memory test. We have to put the pieces back in order." Arlen stepped forward, his pendant glowing faintly once again. "I know this melody," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "My mother used to sing it to me when I was a child." Without hesitation, he began reciting the verses, his voice steady and clear despite the oppressive atmosphere. As he spoke, the stones shifted, aligning themselves into a coherent pattern. A soft hum filled the air, resonating with the rhythm of his words, and a new platform emerged, allowing them to continue. Lyra watched him silently, her earlier suspicions giving way to reluctant admiration. Whatever Arlen's motives might be, there was no denying that he was connected to her people in ways she hadn't fully understood before. Perhaps his presence wasn't coincidence after all. As they neared the final stretch of the trial, the Guardian reappeared, her hood pulled low over her face. She stood at the edge of the last platform, blocking their path with her staff raised high. The runes along its length blazed brightly, casting an eerie glow over the ruins. "You have proven yourselves resourceful," she said, her voice echoing eerily. "But intelligence alone does not guarantee worthiness. To claim the map, you must answer one final question." Lyra tensed, bracing herself for whatever challenge lay ahead. "Ask it," she said firmly. The Guardian lowered her staff slightly, fixing them with an unblinking stare. "Why do you seek Erinder? Speak truthfully, for lies will seal your fate." Silence fell over the group as each member grappled with the question. For Lyra, the answer came easily: survival. Her people had endured centuries of persecution, forced to live in hiding, always looking over their shoulders. If Erinder truly existed, it represented hope, a chance to reclaim their identity and live without fear. "For my people," she said finally, meeting the Guardian's gaze without flinching. "To protect them and ensure their future." The Guardian nodded slowly, then turned to Arlen. "And you?" Arlen hesitated, his jaw tightening as he considered his response. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but resolute. "For peace. Between humans and my mother's people. And for her." The Guardian studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Finally, she stepped aside, lowering her staff completely. "You may proceed." Relief washed over the group as they crossed the final platform, emerging into a small chamber hidden within the ruins. At its center rested a stone tablet, cracked and weathered but still bearing faint traces of the map they sought. Lyra approached it cautiously, her heart pounding with anticipation. "This is it," she whispered, running her fingers over the markings. "The next piece of the puzzle." Arlen joined her, his expression a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "We're closer now," he said softly. "Closer to finding Erinder, and maybe understanding why my mother disappeared." But as they examined the tablet, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the ruins. Dust rained down from above, and the mist outside thickened ominously. "We're not done yet," Lyra said grimly, gripping her knife tightly. "Something's coming." From the shadows beyond the chamber, glowing eyes began to appear, one pair after another, surrounding them in a ring of silent predators. Shadow beasts, larger and more menacing than any they'd encountered before, emerged from the fog, their claws gleaming in the dim light. "They're not retreating this time," Arlen said, his voice tight with tension. What do we do? Lyra squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening. We fight. With no other options left, the group prepared to defend themselves against the horde closing in around them. But as Lyra glanced at Arlen, she couldn't shake the feeling that their battles were far from over, and that the greatest challenges still lay ahead. The chamber erupted into chaos as the shadow beasts lunged forward, their movements swift and predatory. Lyra sprang into action, her knife flashing in the dim light as she struck with precision. Each blow found its mark, but for every beast she felled, two more seemed to take its place. The creatures were relentless, their glowing eyes filled with an unnatural hunger that sent chills down her spine. Arlen fought beside her, wielding a jagged shard of stone he'd picked up from the ruins. His movements were less practiced than hers, but his determination made up for it. Together, they formed a defensive line, shielding the soldiers who struggled to hold their own against the onslaught. Gunfire echoed through the chamber, bright flashes illuminating the snarling faces of the beasts as bullets tore through their ranks. But even mortal wounds didn't seem to slow them down. We can't keep this up forever, one of the soldiers shouted, his voice strained with panic. He fired wildly, his aim growing increasingly erratic as exhaustion set in. Lyra gritted her teeth, dodging a claw swipe that narrowly missed her face. Stay focused, she barked back. If we break formation, we're dead! But the tide was turning against them. The sheer number of shadow beasts overwhelmed their defenses, forcing them to retreat closer to the stone tablet at the center of the chamber. As they backed away, Lyra caught sight of Arlen grappling with one of the larger beasts, his pendant glowing faintly once again. She hesitated, torn between aiding him and holding the line. Arlen! She called out, slashing at a beast that lunged toward her. Use the pendant! Sing the melody! For a moment, Arlen faltered, his expression a mixture of confusion and desperation. Then, remembering the song his mother had taught him, he began to chant softly, his voice trembling but steady. The pendant pulsed brighter, emitting a soft hum that resonated through the chamber. To Lyra's relief, the beasts paused, their glowing eyes fixed on the source of the sound. But unlike before, the effect wasn't immediate. The creatures growled low in their throats, their bodies quivering as if resisting the call of the melody. It was as though the magic binding them to the ruins had grown stronger here, immune to the calming influence of Arlen's song. It's not working, Arlen gasped, clutching the pendant tightly. Sweat dripped from his brow as he poured every ounce of energy into the chant, his voice growing hoarse. Lyra cursed under her breath, realizing they needed something more, something beyond what either of them could do alone. Her gaze darted to the stone tablet behind them, its ancient symbols pulsing faintly in rhythm with the pendant's glow. An idea sparked in her mind, desperate but plausible. The map! She shouted, grabbing Arlen's arm. Bring the pendant to the tablet! Maybe it can amplify the magic! Without hesitation, Arlen staggered toward the tablet, holding the pendant aloft. As he approached, the carvings on the stone flared to life, casting a blinding light that filled the chamber. The shadow beasts recoiled, their snarls turning into pained shrieks as the melody grew louder, echoing off the walls like a chorus of forgotten voices. Lyra shielded her eyes from the brilliance, watching as the beasts dissolved into wisps of smoke, retreating into the shadows from which they had come. Within moments, the chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as the last traces of the creatures vanished. Breathing heavily, Arlen collapsed to his knees, the pendant slipping from his grasp. Lyra rushed to his side, helping him sit upright. His face was pale, his body trembling with exhaustion. Are you okay? She asked, her tone softer now. He nodded weakly, managing a faint smile. I'll live. Behind them, the soldiers stood in stunned silence, their weapons lowered as they stared at the empty space where the beasts had been. None of them spoke. The gravity of what they had just witnessed left them speechless. As the group recovered, Lyra turned her attention back to the stone tablet. Its surface shimmered faintly, the symbols rearranging themselves into a new pattern. A map, clearer and more detailed than anything they had seen before, emerged before their eyes. This is it, she murmured, tracing the lines with her fingers. The path to Arinder. Arlen joined her, studying the map intently. "It's farther than I thought," he said, his voice tinged with both awe and apprehension. "And treacherous. We'll need to cross mountains, rivers, and who knows what else." Lyra nodded grimly. "It won't be easy. But if we stick together, we might actually make it." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For the first time since their journey began, she allowed herself to entertain the possibility that Arlen's intentions were genuine, that he truly wanted to bridge the gap between their peoples. Whether or not he succeeded remained to be seen, but she couldn't deny the spark of hope igniting within her. As they prepared to leave the chamber, the Guardian reappeared, her hood pulled low over her face. She regarded them silently for a moment, her staff glowing faintly in the dim light. "You have proven yourselves worthy," she said finally, her voice devoid of emotion. "But beware, the road ahead will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Trust in each other, or fail." With that, she vanished into the mist, leaving them alone once again. The group exited the veiled glade cautiously, the morning sun breaking through the fog as they emerged into the forest. Though battered and weary, there was a newfound sense of purpose among them, a shared understanding that their mission was far greater than any individual agenda. As they regrouped and plotted their next move, Lyra glanced at Arlen, her earlier mistrust giving way to cautious optimism. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: their fates were intertwined now, bound by the fragile thread of trust they had forged in the crucible of danger. And perhaps, just perhaps, that trust would be enough to change the world.